It was a Tuesday. Rain-washed, gray, and unremarkable in every way. I still remember how the air clung to me, damp and heavy, as I fumbled for the house keys with one hand, balancing a grocery bag in the other. My feet ached from a long shift at the clinic, and I was already mentally preparing dinner, grilled salmon maybe, if the fish hadn't gone bad. I wasn't thinking about love or betrayal, just tired feet and wet hair, and whether Thomas had remembered to take the laundry out of the dryer. When I pushed open the front door, the smell of lemon cleaner greeted me, sharp and too artificial, like someone trying too hard. The house was quiet. No TV murmuring from the living room, no sound of Thomas typing in his office. I dropped the bag on the counter, shook rain off my coat, and there it was. A small velvet box, deep navy, sitting like a secret in the center of the counter. My heart fluttered before I could stop it. A flicker of warmth, stupid and involuntary. We hadn't been romantic in months, but maybe this was his way of starting again. I wiped my wet fingers on my jeans and opened it. Sapphire. Small, elegant, not my style. Definitely not my size. That's when something turned in my stomach. I stood there longer than I care to admit, just staring at it. It was the kind of ring someone gives when they're beginning, not continuing. The kind of ring that says you're new, you're exciting. My engagement ring had been vintage, my grandmother's. This was sleek, intentional. My mouth felt dry. I closed the box, set it back exactly where I found it, and tried to shake off the panic rising in my throat. I should have left it there. But I didn't. I walked into the study and pressed the spacebar on, his laptop. The screen came alive instantly. No password. He never bothered with one. The tabs opened like a confession. One was a jewelry site. Sapphire rings all lined up like a virtual parade. Another showed a reservation at Aubergine, our anniversary restaurant, only not on our anniversary. The name on the confirmation wasn't mine. Dinner for two, Thomas and Alyssa. But it was the email draft that sent my knees weak. I'll tell her after the payment clears. She'll understand. It was a family emergency. This is the cleanest way. The cleanest way. Those 3 words blurred into the others like oil on water. I backed away from the desk as if it might catch fire. Payment, I whispered aloud, as if naming it would change the context. I reached for my phone, hands trembling, and pulled up the banking app. My breath hitched, $150,000 gone. Transferred to Wells & Sons Holdings, Thomas's family's business. An emergency bridge loan he had begged me to co-sign 2 months ago when their construction firm hit financial trouble. Just a formality, he'd said. We'll pay it back within the quarter. I had trusted him. Of course I had. We were married. I didn't even read the full documents. I remember I was cooking when he handed them over, still wearing oven mitts when I signed. And now, here I was, paying off the debts of a family who never truly welcomed me, and being discarded with the ink still drying. I stared down at my wedding ring. The gold was worn soft at the edges, shaped by years of dishes and gardening and compromise. I slipped it off, held it between my fingers. It felt meaningless now, like a souvenir from a place I no longer recognized. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I walked back into the kitchen, set the ring next to the sapphire box, and turned off the stove I hadn't even lit. I looked around the home I helped pay for, the furniture I picked, the walls I painted, the curtains I sewed when money was tight. Everything felt stolen now, like a lie that had been living beside me, wearing my husband's face. In that moment, I understood something I never wanted to. Love doesn't always end in fire. Sometimes it dissolves, quiet, cold, calculated. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the sound of my own breathing, because I knew, without reading another word, that my marriage had ended before I even walked through the door. They say hindsight has perfect vision, but I think that's a lie. Hindsight isn't clear, it's brutal. It sharpens the moments you should have run, circles the signs you buried, and turns every tender memory into a blade. I met Thomas when I was 26. It was at a charity art show, one of those awkward wine-sipping events my friend dragged me to after my breakup with Jared. I had no interest in meeting anyone. I remember standing in front of a painting, red brushstrokes bleeding across a canvas, and hearing his voice behind me. "Looks like heartbreak, doesn't it?" I turned, and there he was, neatly dressed, confident but not smug, with kind eyes, and a voice like velvet dipped in espresso. I smiled despite myself. We talked all night. About books, cities we hadn't seen, childhood memories. He asked questions no one else ever had, like he wanted to understand me, not impress me. When I mentioned my mother, he listened with the kind of stillness that made me feel held. When she died 6 months later, unexpectedly, with nothing left but hospital bills and her favorite lavender perfume, I didn't think I'd survive the grief, but Thomas became my anchor. He showed up with soup and silence. He didn't try to fix me. He just stayed. And sometimes, presence is its own kind of miracle. We got married the next spring. Small ceremony. No aisle walk. I didn't have anyone left to walk me. But there was a jacaranda tree blooming over our vows, and I wore my mother's pendant, close to my collarbone. It felt like she was there. For a while, I truly believed I was safe. Thomas talked a lot about loyalty, especially to family. I thought it was noble. He supported his younger brother through college, sent monthly checks to his parents. "They've sacrificed so much," he used to say. "I owe them." At first, I admired that. Then came the subtle boundaries. He suggested we keep our finances separate, for clarity. Said he wanted to protect both of us from future confusion. But when his student loans weighed him down, I paid them off. When his car needed replacing, I co-signed. When he said he needed help covering the deposit for his parents' new business venture, I transferred $5,000 without blinking. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? The first time I visited his parents' home, his mother complimented my dress, and then asked if I planned on quitting my job once the babies came. I laughed awkwardly, but she didn't. His father eyed me with that polite disinterest reserved for women who were practical, not pedigree. Still, I tried. I brought wine, remembered birthdays, complimented their furniture. I ignored how I was always just Emily, never our Emily. But something shifted the day Thomas came home with a manila envelope. "Emergency," he said, sliding it across the table. "Dad's company is facing a major cash crunch. They need a bridge loan, only for a few months." I looked at the papers. It was legal jargon, most of it. My head throbbed from a long shift at the clinic. "Just need your signature," he said. "We can't do it without your credit line." I hesitated. "That's a lot of money, Thomas. Are you sure?" He kissed the top of my head. "It's family. And you're my partner. We're in this together." That line, it disarmed me every time. Partner. I'd fought so hard to feel like one. So I signed. I wish I could tell you I did it confidently. But the truth is, I felt a small shiver in my spine as the pen scratched across the page. A whisper of doubt I pushed down. Because I loved him. Because I wanted to believe that being needed meant I mattered. In the months that followed, he seemed lighter. More absent, too. He traveled more often, came home with strange excuses, new colognes, unreadable eyes. But every time I asked, he'd smile and pull me in and say, "You worry too much." I began to wear my mother's pendant again, every day, without fail. It became a quiet shield, something to ground me when the air in the house felt off. I'd touch it without thinking, like it could pull me back to truth. But truth had become slippery. Looking back now, I see it all for what it was. A slow erosion. Not an earthquake, but a tide, pulling me under inch by inch, until the day I realized I wasn't his partner. I was his insurance policy. They say hindsight has perfect vision, but I think that's a lie. Hindsight isn't clear. It's brutal. It sharpens the moments you should have run, circles the signs you buried, and turns every tender memory into a blade. I met Thomas when I was 26. It was at a charity art show, one of those awkward, wine-sipping events my friend dragged me to after my breakup with Jared. I had no interest in meeting anyone. I remember standing in front of a painting, red brushstrokes bleeding across a canvas, and hearing his voice behind me. "Looks like heartbreak, doesn't it?" I turned, and there he was, neatly dressed, confident but not smug, with kind eyes, and a voice like velvet dipped in espresso. I smiled despite myself. We talked all night. About books, cities we hadn't seen, childhood memories. He asked questions no one else ever had, like he wanted to understand me, not impress me. When I mentioned my mother, he listened with the kind of stillness that made me feel held. When she died 6 months later, unexpectedly, with nothing left but hospital bills and her favorite lavender perfume, I didn't think I'd survive the grief. But Thomas became my anchor. He showed up with soup and silence. He didn't try to fix me. He just stayed. And sometimes, presence is its own kind of miracle. We got married the next spring. Small ceremony. No aisle walk. I didn't have anyone left to walk me. But there was a jacaranda tree blooming over our vows, and I wore my mother's pendant, close to my collarbone. It felt like she was there. For a while, I truly believed I was safe. Thomas talked a lot about loyalty, especially to family. I thought it was noble. He supported his younger brother through college, sent monthly checks to his parents. "They've sacrificed so much," he used to say. "I owe them." At first, I admired that. Then came the subtle boundaries. He suggested we keep our finances separate for clarity. Said he wanted to protect both of us from future confusion. But when his student loans weighed him down, I paid them off. When his car needed replacing, I co-signed. When he said he needed help covering the deposit for his parents' new business venture, I transferred $5,000 without blinking, because that's what you do when you love someone, right? The first time I visited his parents' home, his mother complimented my dress and then asked if I planned on quitting my job once the babies came. I laughed awkwardly, but she didn't. His father eyed me with that polite disinterest reserved for women who were practical, not pedigree. Still, I tried. I brought wine, remembered birthdays, complimented their furniture. I ignored how I was always just Emily, never our Emily. But something shifted the day Thomas came home with a manila envelope. "Emergency," he said, sliding it across the table. "Dad's company is facing a major cash crunch. They need a bridge loan, only for a few months." I looked at the papers. It was legal jargon, most of it. My head throbbed from a long shift at the clinic. "Just need your signature," he said. "We can't do it without your credit line." I hesitated. "That's a lot of money, Thomas. Are you sure?" He kissed the top of my head. "It's family. And you're my partner. We're in this together." That line, it disarmed me every time. Partner. I'd fought so hard to feel like one. So I signed. I wish I could tell you I did it confidently. But the truth is, I felt a small shiver in my spine as the pen scratched across the page. A whisper of doubt I pushed down. Because I loved him. Because I wanted to believe that being needed meant I mattered. In the months that followed, he seemed lighter. More absent, too. He traveled more often, came home with strange excuses, new colognes, unreadable eyes. But every time I asked, he'd smile and pull me in and say, "You worry too much." I began to wear my mother's pendant again, every day, without fail. It became a quiet shield, something to ground me when the air in the house felt off. I'd touch it without thinking, like it could pull me back to truth. But truth had become slippery. Looking back now, I see it all for what it was, a slow erosion. Not an earthquake, but a tide, pulling me under inch by inch, until the day I realized I wasn't his partner. I was his insurance policy. 3 days passed after I found the ring. 3 days where I carried my body like it didn't belong to me. I went to work. I smiled when necessary. I answered emails. I came home and pretended not to see the growing chasm between who I had been and who I was becoming. I didn't sleep, just lay awake listening to the ceiling creak, wondering if it was grief or anger gnawing at my bones. On the 4th night, I asked him. We were eating takeout, pad thai and spring rolls from the place we used to love before. Things got gray. He sat on the edge of the couch, scrolling through his phone while I pushed noodles around my plate. My chest felt like it was made of glass, thin and about to splinter. I didn't plan it. The question came out of me like breath. "Who's Alyssa?" He looked up slowly. No panic, no guilt, just stillness. Then, he blinked. "You went through my computer?" I almost laughed. "That's your concern right now?" He sighed, set his phone down. "We've grown apart, Emily. You know that." My heart squeezed. "So you just moved on, behind my back, with someone new?" I said the word new like it tasted like metal. "And what, the ring on the counter, that was for her?" He didn't answer, just looked at me like I was a storm he didn't feel like weathering. "She's easier," he finally said. "Less intense. Less demanding." I sat still for a long time, let the weight of it sink in. Easier. As if my love had been a flaw. As if sacrifice made me inconvenient. As if cleaning up his family's financial mess, quietly, completely, had been too loud for his comfort. "You used me," I whispered. "I paid off $150,000 of your family's debt, and now you get to walk away with a clean slate." He shrugged, stood, and took his plate to the sink. "Don't make this dramatic. It's not like I planned it this way." Then he grabbed his coat and left. Just like that. No apology, no explanation, no fight. I stood in the kitchen, watching the door click shut. The silence that followed was different. Thicker, somehow. Like it wrapped around my lungs and pulled. I don't remember walking to the closet. I just remember the feel of my knees, against the floor, the familiar scent of cedar and detergent. I buried myself between coats and shoes and winter scarves, like a child hiding from thunder. And then I screamed, loud and muffled and desperate, into the sleeve of my old trench coat. It smelled like rain and exhaustion. I clutched my wedding. Ring so tight the metal dug into my palm. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when I crawled out, I wasn't the same. The days that followed were a blur of gray hours. I stopped answering texts, canceled plans, let friendships fall to the wayside. No one knew what had happened, not yet, and I didn't have the words to tell them. Sleep became a myth. When I did drift off, I dreamed of my mother. She always wore the same blue sweater, the one with loose threads at the cuffs. She'd sit at the edge of my childhood bed and say, Don't lose yourself for someone else's comfort. I would wake up with her voice ringing in my chest. That sentence became my anchor. Money grew tight fast. Even with my income, the debt, the mortgage, and the silence he left behind all pressed in like walls. I began pawning my jewelry. Not the ring. I couldn't let go of that yet. But the bracelets he gave me on anniversaries, the earrings I wore to our engagement dinner. One by one, I sold them until my jewelry box echoed when I opened it. One morning, while changing the sheets, I reached under the bed and pulled out a crumpled receipt, high-end spa. Full-body couples massage, champagne package, signature facial. It wasn't mine. I'd never been. That was the final crack. I sat on the edge of the bed, receipt in hand, staring at the dent in the mattress where he used to sleep. The void he left didn't just sit in the bed beside me. It bled into the walls, the kitchen, my skin. I looked around the room and realized I didn't belong in it anymore. Not because I wasn't enough, but because I deserved more. That night, I didn't cry. I packed. Just one suitcase. Clothes, my mother's pendant, my sketchbook, and the folder with every document I had signed for him. I left the wedding ring on the nightstand, right next to the spa receipt. In the morning, I left the house keys on the kitchen counter. The same counter where I'd once found a velvet box meant for someone else. Then I walked out the front door without looking back. The air smelled like spring. Wet soil, blooming trees, and the faintest whisper of lavender. And for the first time, in a long, long while, I exhaled. The cottage smelled like sea salt and old wood. It creaked with every gust of wind, and the windows fogged with the breath of the ocean. There was sand in the corners of the floorboards, salt crusted on the windowsills, and a door that stuck just enough to remind me it was real. I loved it instantly. It sat tucked between two dunes on the quieter side of Morro Bay, a place my mother once said felt untouched by noise. She'd brought me here once when I was 11. I remembered little except that she bought me a peach from a roadside stand and told me the ocean could hear secrets. I hadn't believed her then, but now I wasn't so sure. I didn't tell anyone. I was coming. I just drove until the city disappeared in the rearview mirror, and the road narrowed into something softer, less constructed. When I arrived, I turned off my phone and buried it in a drawer. I didn't want to be found. I didn't want to explain. For the first few days, I slept. Not deeply, but often. Curled under mismatched blankets, lulled by the crash of waves and the croak of the front porch swing in the wind. The rhythm of the sea became my lullaby. Constant, indifferent, cleansing. I stopped wearing makeup. My hair tangled and fell into loose waves. I walked barefoot across the sand, letting it scrape. The grief from my skin. The locals didn't pry. At the cafe down the road, an older woman named Darlene poured my coffee each morning and asked only, "Room for cream?" When I stayed long enough to finish a second cup, she offered me a part-time job doing inventory and bookkeeping in the back. No questions. Just a smile and a stack of paper. I took it. The rhythm of routine settled into me like the tide. Slow, sure, healing. I'd wake early, watch gulls wheel through the fog, write in a notebook until the words didn't ache as much. I began journaling every morning, tiny thoughts at first. A list of things I missed. Then, things I didn't. Then, eventually, things I wanted. The list surprised me. One stormy night, as thunder rolled low across the water and the windows trembled in their frames, I pulled out an old photo album I'd brought without thinking. It had followed me like a ghost. Our wedding, birthdays, vacations, smiling, posed, curated lies. I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my threadbare hoodie, flipping through images that no longer felt like mine. And then I struck a match. One by one, I fed the pages into the fireplace. They curled and blackened, the faces warping into smoke. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just watched. It wasn't rage that drove me. It was release. I burned everything except one photo. Me and Thomas standing under the jacaranda tree, my mother's pendant glinting at my collarbone. I pinned it to the fridge with a seashell magnet. Not as a keepsake. As a warning. That version of me, wide-eyed, hopeful, blind, deserved to be remembered too. Not pitied, not erased. Just acknowledged. Some evenings I walked the shoreline and whispered to the sea. Not prayers, not regrets, just truths. I don't miss him, I said once, surprising myself. Another time, he didn't break me. He just revealed the cracks. The ocean never replied. But it didn't need to. It held space. It held silence. And that was enough. One morning, I found a tiny, perfect sand dollar at my doorstep, whole and uncracked. I tucked it into my coat pocket and carried it like a charm. By week 6, I had stopped checking the calendar. The air felt different in my lungs, cleaner, less burdened. I began sketching again, something I hadn't done since college. I drew the coastline, the knots in the driftwood, the curve of waves folding into the shore. My hands remembered what it meant to create without purpose. I was still healing, still piecing together the fragments of a self I'd long abandoned. But for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged to myself again. Not a wife. Not a mistake. Not someone's fallback, just me. Breathing, becoming. It was a Tuesday again, full circle. The courtroom wasn't grand. No dramatic wood paneling or towering ceilings. Just beige walls, humming fluorescent lights, and a faint smell of old coffee. But everything in me felt sharp, awake. My shoes clicked softly against the linoleum as I walked toward the front row and sat beside Sandra, my attorney. Thomas was already there. He wore a navy suit that didn't quite fit, like he'd borrowed someone else's armor. He looked older somehow, less certain. Next to him sat Alyssa, stiff in her seat, her lips pressed into a tight line. Her eyes darted between me and the folder Sandra held on her lap. I didn't look away. The bailiff called our case. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and no patience for nonsense, took the bench. The hearing began. It all moved slower than I expected. Paperwork, statements, clarifications. Then Sandra stood. She spoke clearly and without venom, laying out the facts, the altered signature, the forged amendment to increase my liability, the fraudulent use of funds, the documented misuse of marital and business accounts. She read aloud one line from Thomas's email, the one I found all those months ago. I'll tell her after the payment clears. I watched Alyssa shift in her seat. She hadn't known that part. Thomas didn't say much. When asked to respond, he gave vague answers. Claimed miscommunication, oversight, pressure from his parents. But his voice cracked halfway through, and the judge leaned forward. Did you or did you not alter your wife's financial agreement without her knowledge? Silence. Then, yes. Just one word, but it echoed through my ribs. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My palms were dry, my voice steady. He didn't just betray me, I began. He erased me. Thomas looked up. I spent years turning myself into someone small enough to carry his burdens, I said. I gave money, time, belief. And when I ran out, he took more. Quietly, legally, as if I didn't matter. I paused, fingers grazing the edge of my mother's pendant. "But I do matter," I said. "Not because the law says so, because I say so." I found myself again, and I won't be made invisible. No one clapped. This wasn't that kind of moment. But something shifted in the room. A silence. Not awkward, but reverent. The judge nodded once, then turned to Thomas and began delivering the ruling. Full financial restitution for the misused loan funds. Immediate release of my name from all shared business debt. A formal record of the forgery filed under civil fraud. I didn't smile. Not even when Thomas dropped his pen. When it was over, I walked outside and felt the sunlight hit my face like a baptism. The sky was clear, wide open. Sandra patted my shoulder and said, "That was the strongest thing I've seen in a courtroom all year. But strength, I've learned, isn't loud. It's not fury or vengeance. It's quiet, rooted. It's choosing not to shrink, even when you could vanish completely." Back at the coast, the gallery was buzzing. My show was called Salt and Flame. The pieces were raw, layered with texture, sand mixed into the paint, bits of torn receipts collaged into waves, fragments of burned photos embedded in canvas. The centerpiece was a painting titled The Ledger. It showed a woman standing in ankle-deep water at dusk, holding a small flame in her bare hand. Her face wasn't visible, only the curve of her spine, the stillness of her stance. It sold within the first hour. Darlene brought me champagne. "To survival," she said, clinking her glass to mine. I didn't correct her. That night, I walked along the shoreline barefoot, the ocean side beside me, low and steady. I let the waves kiss my ankles, let the salt sting just a little. Healing isn't always soft. When I returned home, I opened my journal, the one I'd filled cover to cover with questions, fears, tiny triumphs. I turned to the last page and wrote, "I gave everything once. Now, I give only what I choose, and that is more than enough." I closed the book. Not with an ending, but with a beginning I could finally call my own. The first time I laughed again, really laughed, it caught me off guard. I was stacking invoices at the cafe, coffee-stained papers sliding everywhere, when Darlene walked in, shook her head at the chaos, and muttered, "You organize numbers like a drunk octopus." It wasn't even that funny, but something broke open inside me, something light, and I let it out, loud and full, and it felt like reclaiming something I hadn't even known I'd lost. My sound. I was still living in the cottage, still walking the shoreline each morning, still journaling and painting in the quiet hours. My days weren't perfect, but they were mine. Slowly, I began to rebuild rituals, pouring tea in my mother's chipped mug, lighting lavender candles at night, brushing sand off the porch like it mattered. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name in stiff block letters. Inside was a formal notice from my bank. Inactive personal account activity and document update request. A forgotten savings account my mother had opened for me in college. Barely a few $1,000s, I assumed. But tucked behind the update form was something else. A scan of my signature, except I hadn't signed this one. It was on the co-signed loan document, and the signature was wrong. Close, but not mine. A hollow opened in my chest. I dug through the folder I'd brought with me. The original documents. Thomas had rushed me to sign at the kitchen table. I compared them. Side by side, the ink trembled. The slant of the letters didn't match. One version was mine, rushed, authentic. The other, forged. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat very still, fraud, not carelessness, not misunderstanding, deliberate. I didn't want revenge, but I needed the truth. The next morning, I drove into town and met with a legal advisor, Sandra, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a calming presence. I handed her the papers expecting dismissal. Instead, she said, "This is serious. He increased the borrowing limit without your consent. You're within your rights to press criminal charges." The words echoed through me like distant thunder. Criminal charges. It felt so heavy, so final. "I don't want to ruin his life," I whispered. I don't want him to keep rewriting mine." She nodded. "Then let's start with clarity. Documentation. We follow the thread." And so I did. I went through old emails, texts, joint account statements. I highlighted purchases made after he'd claimed they were broke. Luxury hotels, jewelry, a 3-day yacht rental, spa weekends, receipts tucked into folders, pictures, still stored in the cloud. Him and Alyssa smiling at vineyards I had never visited, wearing sunglasses I bought him for his birthday. It all built into something undeniable, a timeline, a ledger of truth. Each entry told a story, not just of betrayal, but of strategy. He had played me like a financial instrument, reliable, quiet, and never asking too many questions. But I wasn't silent anymore. While the case was being reviewed, I painted. At first, the art came in bursts, abstract, raw. Then shapes began to form. A woman with gold scars across her chest, a storm swallowing a house, a wave returning a pearl to shore. One evening, I brought a few pieces into the cafe to show Darlene. She whistled low and called her cousin, who owned a small gallery in town. 2 weeks later, I had a wall of my own. No title, no artist bio, just reclamation. It was enough. I stood there on opening night, barefoot in flats, wearing a dress I'd once worn to one of Thomas's work events. Back then, I had felt like an accessory. That night, I felt like a declaration. People lingered in front of one piece, a cracked glass heart stitched with gold leaf. "Is this about heartbreak?" a woman asked me. I smiled. "No. It's about rebuilding and choosing what gets to shine." The woman nodded slowly. "Then you've nailed it." That night, I walked home with sand on my heels and my shoulders loose. The sky above me was bruised with stars. I pressed a hand to my chest, where the pendant usually lay. I had taken it off, days earlier, not out of rejection, but because I finally realized my mother didn't live in that necklace. She lived in me. In the way I stood up straighter now. In the way I spoke slower. In the way I didn't flinch when people asked, "So, what's your story?" Because for the first time I wasn't afraid to tell it, and I was almost ready to finish it.